Hello and welcome. In today's lesson, we will be covering the basics of the NestJS error handling. I will show you how to create a custom error classes and how to create exception filters. So please watch the video till the end to fully understand the topic. Okay, without any further ado, let's get started. Let's start from setting the app server. Firstly, we have to initialize the database server. For that, inside the terminal window, please type docker compose app. Then, in the new terminal window, type npm run migration:run. Finally, after the migration have finished, please type npm run start:dev. Great, now when the app has started, we can move on. During the recipe app development, we intentionally threw a few exceptions. But why this work and why the app doesn't crash? The answer is, it works because of the NestJS built-in exception layer. The exception layer catches all of the errors not handled in the code. Then it sends an appropriate, user-friendly message as a response. The exception layer is based on entities called exception filters. They are just classes implementing the exception filter interface. The interface requires only one method called catch. The method takes the exception and the host object as the input parameters. Speaking about exception objects, the NestJS framework provides a set of standard exceptions that inherits from the HTTP exception. You can find here the bad request exception, unauthorized exception, not found exception, and so on. In numerous instances, the built-in exceptions are sufficient, but there are cases when you would like to create custom ones. In the recipe app, in the auth service, I threw the same HTTP exception 3 times. The message is the same, so it's a good idea to create a custom error and have it in one place. For that, I will create a new directory and I will call it exceptions. Inside the directory, I will create a file called invalidcredentials.exception.ts. The error class has to extend the HTTP exception from a NestJS common package. Inside the class constructor, I will call the super method. I will set there the custom message. Then, I will use the HTTP status enum from the NestJS common. The enum provides all of the HTTP statuses. It's more descriptive to use HTTP status unauthorized instead of bare number. That's it, the error class is done. Now we can throw invalid credentials error inside the service instead of the HTTP exception. Great, now we know how to create custom exception classes. But what if we want to extend or change the defaults of how the errors are handled? For that, we can create a custom exception filter. I will create a new directory and I will call it global filters. I'm creating a global filters because I would like to handle the errors from all of the modules in the same way. Inside the directory, I will create a file called httpexception.filter. HTTP exception filter class has to implement the exception filter interface. The interface requires only one method called catch. Inside the method, we can specify the custom logic of how to handle the errors. Moreover, our class has to be annotated with the catch decorator, where we will pass the exception type we want to handle. In our case, it's the HTTP exception. Inside the class, I will initialize the logger object. It will be helpful in a minute. Then, I will inject the config service through the class constructor. Now, let's implement the catch method. Let's say we have to log the error and send different response based on the environment we work with. If it's a development server, we will add a stack trace to the error object to improve the debugging experience. Firstly, I will create the context variable and I will use the hosts method called switch to HTTP. Basically, it allows us to access the request properties. Then, I will grab the response object from the context. By default, NestJS uses the Express.js package to handle the requests. So here, the request object comes from the Express package. Next, I will read the status from the exception and I will assign it to the variable. Then I will use the config service to check if app runs on production or not. If you don't know the config service and you want to learn how to manage configuration in NestJS, I prepared a separate video about it. You can check it here. To check if app runs on production, I will set the environment variable called node_env. And then I will compare it with desired string value. Now we have all needed variables. Let's firstly use the logger and log the error to the console. Then let's use the response object and let's set the status of the response. Finally, I will send the JSON object. If we are working with a production system, I will send the status code, timestamp and the message. If we are on the development server, I will add the stack trace to the object. And that's it. The filter is done. Now let's open the main.ts file. The app object exposes another yet useful method. It's called useGlobalFilters. The only thing we have to do is to pass there the filters we want to use. Then the NestJS framework will use those filters to handle the exceptions. I will pass there the HTTP exception filter. When we save the file, we are ready to check the filter in the action. Let's open the Thunder client. I will try to log in with invalid credentials. When I click send, there is our custom error object sent as a response. I can see there the stack trace. I have set the node_env to be equal to development. Let's stop the server and set it to be equal to production. Now, when I start the server again and try to log in, there shouldn't be a stack trace in the response. Yes, now it works as expected. Great, now we know how to catch some NestJS exceptions. But what if you would like to catch all of the exceptions? For example, we could create invalid query and type ORM could throw some errors. Those errors won't be handled by our custom filter. For such scenarios, we will create another one filter. I will create a file called allexceptions.filter.ts. Inside it, I will create a class called allExceptionsFilter. Again, the allExceptionsFilter class has to implement the exception filter interface. But this time, I won't specify an error class inside the catch decorator. As the result, it will catch all of the errors. Again, I will initialize the logger class. Then, I will inject the HTTP adapter host to the constructor. I have to use the adapter class to attach the error to the response. Then, inside the catch method, I will unwrap the HTTP adapter from the HTTP adapter host object. Next, I will create the context variable, and I will create variable containing the HTTP status we will return. Because we don't know the exact error, I will return the internal server error status. Next, I will log the error message to the console and I will attach the stack trace to the message. Finally, I will create variable for response body. This time, it will contain the status as well as the message. Finally, we will use the HTTP adapters method called reply. It will send our custom response to the client. We have to pass to it the response object from the context, response body, and the response status. And that's it. That's the whole filter. Lastly, we have to use it in the main module. I will add it as a second parameter of the useGlobalFilters. Also, we cannot forget about passing there the HTTP adapter host object. We can access it using the appget method. Cool, now we can test it out. To check if it works, I will return a plain error from the recipe controllers method. Now, when I try to get recipes, the app will throw the error. But the error is handled by our custom filter. Great. That's it what I wanted to show you in today's lesson. Good job. That's another huge step forward in our journey. In the next video, I will show you how to Dockerize the NestJS app. So stay tuned. Meanwhile, thank you for the watching and see you next time.